I never planned for this. I never planned to break the law, to risk everything for a man I barely knew. But the night I found him, bleeding, desperate, running from the police, something inside me told me I couldn't just walk away. So, I took him in. I hid him. I loved him. And in the end, I paid the price. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring you more gripping and emotional stories like this one. The rain poured relentlessly that night, drumming against the city streets like a warning, soaking into my jacket as I hurried through the alleyway behind my apartment. I had just finished my late shift at the bar, my mind set on nothing more than a hot shower and sleep. But then I heard it, the heavy, ragged breathing of someone struggling to stay conscious. I turned the corner and there he was, a man, tall, broad-shouldered, bleeding. His dark skin glistened with rain and sweat, his white tank top clinging to his chest, stained with dirt and blood. His arms were covered in scratches, and when his gaze met mine, my breath caught. Fear, desperation, defiance. I should have kept walking. I should have looked away. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped closer. His body tensed like he was ready to run, but he couldn't. His leg was injured and he was barely holding himself upright. That's when I heard it, the distant wail of police sirens. My stomach dropped. I had seen enough news stories to put the pieces together. He was on the run. "Please," he rasped, barely audible over the rain. "I just need a place to hide for a few hours." I should have said no, but something in his voice, the raw desperation, the unspoken plea, made it impossible to turn away. I glanced down the alley. The sirens were getting louder, closer. I had seconds to decide. I reached for his arm. "Come with me." His eyes widened, but he didn't hesitate. He let me pull him. We stumbled up the fire escape, my heart slamming against my ribs as I yanked open the window to my apartment. He climbed in first, wincing as he landed hard on the wooden floor. I slipped in after him, slamming the window shut just as flashing red and blue lights flooded the alley below. We both held our breath. The officers stepped out of their car, their radios crackling. I could barely make out their voices over the rain, but I heard enough. "Suspect is armed and dangerous." My pulse pounded. What the hell had I just done? The man sat against the wall, breathing hard, one hand pressed to his side where blood seeped through his shirt. Even in the dim light of my apartment, I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way his body shook from pain, from adrenaline. I crouched down in front of him. "Who are you?" He swallowed hard. "Malik," he murmured. "Malik Carter." My throat was dry. What did you do?" His lips parted, but before he could answer, the radio below crackled again. "He couldn't have gotten far. We search every building." My stomach twisted. I had just let a fugitive into my home, and now I was part of this. I stood frozen in my dark apartment, the weight of what I had just done sinking into my chest like a brick. I had just let a fugitive into my home. The police were searching the area. If they found him here, I wouldn't just be an innocent bystander. I'd be an accomplice. Malik sat on the floor, his back against the wall, breathing heavily. Even in the dim light, I could see the way his chest rose and fell unevenly, the pain flickering across his face as he pressed his hand to his bleeding side. His dark eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I swallowed hard. "How bad is it?" He looked down at his side, then back at me. "I've had worse." I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my wet hair. That's not exactly reassuring. The police radios crackled outside, and Malik tensed, his jaw clenching. My heart pounded. If they knocked on my door, what was I going to do? Malik must have seen the panic in my face because his expression softened. Just a little. Look, man, I get it. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. If you tell me to leave, I will. I stared at him. He was bleeding, exhausted, on the verge of collapse. And yet, he was still giving me a choice. I took a deep breath. You can't go anywhere right now. You wouldn't make it down the stairs. His lips twitched slightly. So you're not kicking me out? I hesitated. Every rational part of me was screaming that this was insane, that I should tell him to leave, call the cops, wash my hands of this mess. But then I thought about what the police had said, armed and dangerous. I looked at Malik, the way his hands trembled slightly from pain, the way his breaths came too fast, too uneven. He didn't look dangerous. He looked like a man who had spent his entire life running. And somehow, I couldn't bring myself to throw him back to the wolves. Stay, I said finally. But you have to tell me the truth. What are you running from? Malik let out a slow breath, his head resting against the wall. It's a long story. I crossed my arms. We've got time. He exhaled sharply, wincing as he adjusted himself. They think I killed someone. My stomach clenched. Did you? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down, his fingers flexing against his thigh. No, he said finally. But it doesn't matter. They want me to be guilty. That's all that counts. I didn't realize I was holding my breath. I searched his face, looking for some kind of lie, some kind of hesitation. But there was none. Before I could say anything, there was a loud knock at the door. My body went rigid. Malik's entire frame tensed, his muscles coiling like a trapped animal. Police! Open up! My throat went dry. My legs refused to move. This was it. If I opened that door, my life would never be the same. Malik's eyes met mine, something dark and pleading behind them. I had seconds to decide, and I did. I turned to Malik and whispered, "Hide." Malik's eyes widened for a split second before he pushed himself off the floor, his body moving on pure instinct despite the pain. He gritted his teeth as he staggered toward my bedroom, and I followed him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The closet," I whispered, yanking the door open. "Get in." He didn't argue. He slipped inside, his broad frame barely fitting between my hanging clothes. I tossed a pile of laundry in front of him to make it look natural, then shut the door just as another pounding knock shook the apartment. I exhaled sharply and forced myself to walk back to the living room. My palms were sweaty. My legs felt like lead. I knew I had seconds to pull myself together before they saw right through me. I unlocked the door and pulled it open just enough to block their view inside. 2 officers stood in the hallway, their uniforms dark under the flickering light of the apartment complex. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp eyes, narrowed his gaze at me. "Evening," he said. His voice was casual, but the tension in his posture told me he wasn't here for small talk. I swallowed hard. "Can I help you?" The other officer, a shorter man with a stern expression, glanced down at his notepad. "We're searching the area for a suspect, dark-skinned male, 6'4", last seen wearing a white tank top and dark jeans. We have reason to believe he might have come through this way." I forced my expression to stay neutral. "Haven't seen anyone." The first officer's eyes studied me, searching for cracks. "Mind if we take a look around?" My stomach clenched. I should have said no. I should have told them they needed a warrant. But I was terrified that saying no would only make them suspicious. I stepped back, forcing my hands to stay at my sides so they wouldn't see them shaking. "Yeah, sure." They moved past me, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. The first officer swept his gaze across my small apartment, the worn couch, The coffee table stacked with books, the open window still dripping from the rain. I held my breath as they walked toward the hallway. The second officer glanced at me. "You live alone?" I nodded. "Yeah." He hummed, unconvinced. His eyes flicked to my bedroom door. "Mind if we check in here?" I wanted to scream, to tell them no, to tell them to get the hell out. Instead, I nodded. "Go ahead." My heart pounded as the first officer stepped inside. He scanned the room, his gaze skimming over the bed, the dresser, the closed closet door. He moved toward it. My pulse skyrocketed. My skin burned with fear. "Please don't open it. Please." The officer reached out, his hand grazing the closet handle. Then his radio crackled. "We've got a possible sighting 3 blocks east. All units respond." The officer hesitated, then sighed. He turned back to me, his expression unreadable. "If you see anything, you call us. Understood?" I nodded quickly. "Yeah, of course." The second officer shot me a final glance before they turned and left, shutting the door behind them. I collapsed against the wall, my lungs finally releasing the breath I had been holding. My hands were still shaking as I rushed back to the closet, yanking the door open. Malik was still inside, crouched in the shadows, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might break. I exhaled. "They're gone." He stared at me for a long moment before finally stepping out, his body tense, his shoulders rising and falling with controlled breaths. Then, before I could process what was happening, he reached for me. His hand wrapped around the back of my neck, his fingers pressing into my skin. His forehead met mine, his breath warm and shaky against my lips. "Why did you do that?" he whispered. I swallowed hard. I didn't have an answer. But when his lips barely brushed against mine, just a ghost of a touch, hesitant, dangerous, electric. I knew one thing for sure. I was already in too deep. I didn't pull away. I should have. Every rational thought in my head screamed at me to step back, to remind myself who he was, what he was running from, what I had just risked by letting him stay. But none of that mattered when his lips hovered so close to mine that I could feel his breath. Malik's fingers tightened around the back of my neck, his touch firm yet uncertain, like he was testing the boundaries of whatever was happening between us. His forehead pressed lightly against mine, and for a moment we just stood there, silent, unspoken tension crackling in the air between us like a live wire. "You didn't have to do that," he murmured, his voice rough, low. "You could have turned me in." I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my throat. "I know." His thumb brushed against my skin, slow, hesitant. "Then why didn't you?" I had no answer. Or maybe I did, but I was too afraid to say it out loud. Because I had been drawn to him the second I saw him. Because the way his dark eyes held mine made it impossible to look away. Because despite everything, the danger, the risk, the unknown, I wanted him. And right now, I wanted him to kiss me. His eyes flicked to my lips, and for a second I thought he was going to. I wanted him to. My breath hitched, my fingers curling into the fabric of his damp shirt. Then he pulled away. The moment snapped. The air between us cooled, reality rushing back in like a slap to the face. Malik cleared his throat, stepping back, his jaw tense. "I should go." My chest tightened. "You can't. They're still looking for you." His eyes met mine, hesitation flickering across his face. He knew I was right. He wouldn't make it far, not with the cops swarming the area, not in his condition. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. "Look, just stay for the night. Rest. Then we figure out a plan." Malik hesitated before nodding slowly. All right. One night. I forced a small, nervous laugh. Yeah, one night. But deep down, I knew it was a lie, because one night was never going to be enough. I gave him clothes, an old hoodie and sweatpants that were too small for him, stretching across his broad shoulders and long legs. He moved carefully, the pain from his injury still visible in every step. I watched as he sat on the couch, his body sinking into the cushions, exhaustion written all over his face. It was the first time I really looked at him, without the fear, without the rush of adrenaline clouding my mind. He was beautiful. Strong jawline, deep brown skin, lips that parted slightly as he exhaled, his fingers dragging over the stubble on his chin. His eyes. God, his eyes. And I had just let this beautiful, dangerous man into my home. You keep staring at me like that, I'm going to start thinking you have a crush on me, Malik muttered, a hint of amusement in his voice. Heat crawled up my neck. What? No, I'm just... He smirked, tilting his head back against the couch. Relax, man, I'm messing with you. I huffed, folding my arms. You're real comfortable for someone who just had cops banging on my door. He sighed, the teasing fading. I guess I don't have a choice. He glanced at me. You don't either. I swallowed hard. He was right. I was already in this. I turned toward the kitchen. You should eat something. I'll find you some food. But before I could take another step, he spoke again. Ethan. I froze. He had never said my name before, not once. Hearing it come from his lips sent a strange warmth through my chest. I turned back. His expression was softer now, his usual guarded exterior cracking just a little. Thank you, he said quietly. I nodded, but I couldn't find the words to respond. So I turned and walked away, my mind spinning. I had let a fugitive into my home. And the worst part? I didn't regret it. The night stretched on in heavy silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me as I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the closed door between me and the man I had just risked everything for. Malik was in the other room, probably asleep on my couch, his broad frame taking up more space than the old cushions could handle. I could still feel the warmth of his fingertips on the back of my neck, the way his breath had hitched when our lips had almost met. It was dangerous. Everything about this was dangerous. But I couldn't ignore the way my body reacted to him, the way my heart pounded every time he looked at me. I lay back, exhaling sharply, willing myself to stop thinking about it. But I couldn't. Sometime after midnight, I heard movement outside my door. The soft creak of the floorboards, the shuffle of bare feet. I sat up instantly, my pulse spiking, before I realized it was Malik. I got up and pulled the door open. He was standing in the dim light of the hallway, his hoodie hanging loosely off his shoulders, his sweatpants slung low on his hips. His dark eyes met mine, unreadable in the low light. You okay? I asked, my voice rough with sleep. He hesitated, shifting slightly. Couldn't sleep. Neither could I. I nodded toward the kitchen. Come on. We ended up sitting at the small table in my kitchen, an open beer between us. Malik rubbed his hands over his face, exhaustion visible in the slope of his shoulders. I wanted to ask. I wanted to know everything. Who he was before this, what had happened, what he was so damn afraid of. Instead, I just said, How long have you been running? He exhaled, leaning back. A little over a year. I blinked. A year. He nodded slowly. I was framed for something I didn't do. The system doesn't give a damn if you're innocent when you look like me. His fingers curled into a fist on the table, tension rolling off of him. My throat tightened. I believed him. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I was stupid for trusting a man I barely knew, but deep down, I knew he wasn't lying. "What happened?" I asked softly. Malik hesitated, his jaw tightening. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. But then, he let out a slow, shuddering breath. "My brother got killed. Cops said it was self-defense, said he had a gun. He didn't." His voice wavered slightly, but he swallowed hard, keeping himself together. I started asking questions, pushing too hard. Next thing I knew, they were knocking on my door, saying I shot a man, saying they had evidence. I clenched my fists under the table. It was a setup. Malik let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "They don't need real proof, just an excuse." My stomach churned. The world I had grown up in, the one where cops were supposed to protect people, where justice was something you could trust. It had never been his world. I reached out, hesitating for just a second before resting my hand over his. He went still beneath my touch, his breath catching slightly. "You don't have to run forever," I said. He met my gaze, something dark and raw flashing behind his eyes. "You don't know that." I squeezed his hand. "Then let me help you." A sharp knock at the door made us both freeze. "No, not now." Malik tensed, his body going rigid. My mind went blank with fear. Then, a voice. "Ethan, it's me. Open up." My stomach dropped. It was my brother. I stared at the door, my entire body locking up. My brother. Malik's grip on my hand tightened, his breathing shallow. He was frozen, just like me, his dark eyes locked onto the door as if it might burst open at any second. The weight of what was about to happen settled deep in my chest, heavy and suffocating. My brother, Noah, wasn't someone you ignored. He had always been the golden boy of the family, the one who did everything right, followed the rules, believed in the same things my parents did. And he had never approved of me, not when I started pulling away from the church, not when I distanced myself from our family's rigid beliefs. And now, he was here. Another knock. Louder. "Ethan, I know you're in there." Malik's hand slipped away from mine as he pushed himself to his feet, his entire body tense, ready to run. But there was nowhere to go. He was trapped here, with me. I swallowed hard and stood. "Stay out of sight." His jaw clenched, but he nodded. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't trust this. Didn't trust me. And maybe he shouldn't. With a deep breath, I moved to the door, unlocking it with shaking hands before cracking it open. Noah stood there, his face shadowed under the dim hallway light. He was tall, broad-shouldered like me, but where I had always been hesitant, Noah was sure. His eyes narrowed. "You took too long to answer." I forced a shrug. "It's late." He glanced past me, trying to peer into the apartment. "Can I come in?" My pulse spiked. "No." His lips pressed into a thin line. "Ethan, I know." The world shifted under my feet. My throat went dry. "Know what?" His expression darkened. "That you're hiding someone. That you're harboring a fugitive." I sucked in a breath, panic rising in my chest. How? How did he know? Noah stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't think you understand how serious this is. This man, Malik Carter, he's dangerous." I clenched my fists. "He's innocent." Noah scoffed, shaking his head. "You don't know that." But I did. I had seen the truth in Malik's eyes, felt it in the way he told his story, the way he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. And I had made my choice. "Noah," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. "You need to leave." His jaw tightened. "Ethan, don't be stupid. The cops are already on their way." Everything inside me stopped. He had called them. My breath caught, my heart hammering. I turned, my body moving before my brain could catch up. "Malik, we have to go!" He was already on his feet, eyes wild. I grabbed his wrist, pulling him toward the window just as the sound of sirens filled the streets outside. Too late. Red and blue lights flooded my apartment, flashing through the curtains. The sound of car doors slamming, of boots hitting pavement, of officers yelling commands. Malik's breath was ragged. This was it. This was the end. I turned to him, gripping both sides of his face. "Run!" His eyes darted to the fire escape, then back to me. "Ethan, I can't." The sound of the front door bursting open shattered everything. Malik moved on instinct, shoving me aside just as officers stormed in, guns raised, yelling, chaos. And then, one wrong move, a single second, a heartbeat. Malik turned. An officer shouted, and I stepped in front of him. A deafening bang. Pain exploded in my chest. The world blurred. My knees buckled. I heard Malik scream my name, felt his arms catch me before I hit the ground. But my body was already numb, my vision flickering in and out. Noah's face was there, horrified. The officers, shouting. But none of it mattered. All I could focus on was Malik. He was holding me, begging me to stay awake. His hands, warm and shaking, pressed against my chest, trying to stop the blood. I wanted to tell him I was sorry, that I wasn't afraid anymore, that he was worth it. But all I could do was look at him. His eyes, so full of love, full of pain. And then, darkness. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who loves powerful, emotional stories. Love can be dangerous, love can be painful, but sometimes love is worth everything.